Welcome to Summerlin Church. I'm Peter By, and usually I'm behind the cameras, but stepping out in front here today to welcome you to the start of our Advent season. We've decorated our sanctuary, as you can see, as festive as we can, but more importantly, we wanted to give you a sense of comfort and joy as this Advent season begins. In a moment, David Mosgofian Koeker will bring us the message entitled Affliction and Transformation. And with a title like that, I'm curious to see how it all plays out. Our music team of Kathleen Sieck and Hodges will play and sing O Come Emmanuel. I think it's the perfect song to begin the Advent season. Jenny Slaraw of our children's ministry has another wonderful children's biblical story called Get Ready, which is precisely what we're doing. We're getting ready for the birth of the Christ child. You know, as part of our tradition, we light Advent candles at this time of the year. So we have lit the first candle to signify our hope in the coming light of Christ. Advent means coming. As we hear in Isaiah chapter 2, verse 4, we are preparing ourselves for the days when the nations shall beat their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. And now let's join David with today's message, Affliction and Transformation.
Welcome to our Summerlin Church video. I'm so glad you're here. This is the beginning of a beautiful celebration in the life of the church. This video is the first of our series of Advent videos, which is a time where we look ahead to Christmas, to the time where Jesus came into the world. God himself put on our outfit of flesh and said, I am going to help you learn to speak the language of love so fluently that I'm going to come and live among you. So we take time 4 weeks ahead of Christmas to anticipate the beauty of this holiday, as well as we anticipate when Christ comes back to the world. And so I invite you into that practice. Wherever you're coming from, I invite you into this teaching that's centered in who Jesus is and the way he teaches us to learn, to live, and to love like Jesus does. So welcome to this video. For those of you who are part of our church family, you've seen our Advent wreath giveaway. If you haven't gotten in on the free wreath yet, do it. Even though this is the first Sunday of Advent, go ahead and snag a wreath. They are a way for you to light candles and have readings and a spiritual practice in your home this year. So go ahead and reach out to us, send a note to Jenny, or look on our website, and there's a way to sign up to get a free wreath that we want you to have a part of this Advent season. For those of you who are watching this in real time, happy Thanksgiving. I hope it was a good celebration for you. The last talk I gave was on how to navigate the holidays, including Thanksgiving, in a COVID-safe way, but in a spiritually rich and meaningful way to give us tools to navigate these days. So I hope some of those were helpful. If you didn't see that, go ahead and look at that video. It's the one right before this one as you look ahead to Christmas for some tips on how to navigate the holidays this year. I want to tell you a story that was part of transformation in my life. We're in the midst of a series on healing and transformation, and I think back to times of my life where I've had turning points. I've had transformation moments, and I can point to a really clear one in college. It's not attached to healing. It's attached to the exact opposite. It's attached to affliction. But here's the story. I went to a really small private liberal arts college in Colorado Springs, Colorado. It's called the Colorado College. It was a great fit for me, but it's an alternative school, meaning we didn't take a normal approach to academics. What we did is we took one class at a time. So in the course of a semester, we got 4 courses in from the beginning to the end of the semester, but we just took one for 3.5 weeks and then took a break, and then took the next one. So it was pretty much 8 hours a day of one subject, one class, whatever it was. It really emphasized experiential education. So we got to do a lot of field work, field trips, be on site, and integrate experiential ed in the midst of our college education. So it was great. It attracted a ton of really amazing people from all over the country. Someone from every state goes to that college, as well as international students. But everyone had to sign into this intense learning environment. So everyone was all in on what was called the block plan, which meant that people were thinking outside the box in general. A culture of zero procrastination. We covered about a week's worth of material in a day. So a culture of everyone goes to class, no one procrastinates. A really academically focused college experience, which was really fun. It also meant that most people there thought things traditional were uncool. Anything Western was kind of lame. We were not a college that was into football. We were a college that was into anything non-Western, Eastern, from other parts of the world. That was what was really cool to us. And so there were about a dozen people who would claim Christ. My freshman year, when I showed up on campus, it was not a campus that was at all Christian in any way, but there was a small group of us that I hold in really high regard. They're amazing people of faith that are willing to put their faith on their sleeves and be in an alternative and dynamic environment and share the light of Christ. So it was in some ways kind of like an early church. We read about, what the early church was like in Acts and things like that. It was a small group of believers in this world of people who were believing other things. That they knew Jesus was the way, and they called themselves the way, and they moved forward in the way of Jesus. And there was a real tight-knit group that did that. And it kind of felt like that at my college. I'm still in touch with a handful of those folks. We bonded so deeply. Talked with some of those guys just a couple weeks ago, and I cherish those friendships from these folks who really carved out a way. Well, if you flash back to what college may have been like for you, it may have been very different than this. If you maybe didn't even go to college at all, that's fine. But there is a tradition where people who want to visit a college, like a high school senior, will come and check it out. Well, at this point in college, I was a senior, and there was a high school senior coming to check out our college. She also had her life centered in Christ. Her name's Amelia. She was from Denver, and through the chain of communication, the small group of Christians on campus, which at that time had actually gotten a little bit bigger, heard that Amelia was coming, and they said, "Hey, can you guys take Amelia around, show her around, and what it's like to be a Christian at the Colorado College?" And Amelia was also blind. So in a very literal way, she needed to be shown around. And that was great for us, because one of our crew, one of this small group of students that were centered in Jesus, is also blind. Her name is Robin. Robin was great. Robin was also a senior. She was my year. She was just a dynamic, amazing human that equipped us to really easily accommodate someone who was blind on our campus. So Amelia came on a Friday. She left on a Sunday. The weekend was awesome. We got to show her around and hang out and lots of good chats, and just an incredible human. One of those high school seniors who you think, this gal is wise beyond her years. She has tapped into something much deeper. She, in a real way, is drawing her water from a deeper well, and I want to tap into that well. That was the experience of being around Amelia as a high school senior. And at the end of the weekend, I remember we went to church on Sunday morning, a group of us, and then afterwards we probably had some food together, and there was a question that the Holy Spirit had been prompting me to ask her kind of the whole weekend, but I was too self-conscious to ask her. And so I waited until the last moment. It was after lunch. I think someone was coming to pick her up to take her back to Denver, and I just snuck in the question. I was like, "Hey, sorry," and I apologized. Sorry if this makes you uncomfortable, but I'm just curious. How has being blind influenced your faith in Jesus? And she just looked at me and she said, "Oh, well, I didn't believe in Jesus until I went blind." I said, "What?" And she described that she had actually lost her sight, unfortunately, in a car accident her freshman year of high school. So I'm talking to someone who's relatively recently blind. She has gone through high school having lost her sight and yet gained insight into the truth of who Jesus is. If you've been following these talks on our website or YouTube channel so far, you know that this series on healing and transformation has taken a look at Jesus' healing ministry and taken that really seriously and said Jesus healed people who were blind, people who were deaf, people who were paralyzed and lame and couldn't walk. And that was transformational experiences for those people. Yet, we are all carrying pieces of those broken places with us. There are ways in which each and every one of us is blind. There are ways in which each and every one of us can't hear fully. There are ways in which we are immobilized. And the healing of Christ is for each and every one of us in those areas as well. So I invite you to go back and listen to any of those talks you may have missed. They're awesome, and they are moving us deeper into this journey, this adventure of spirituality in Jesus Christ. So check those out. In this one, we're going to take a look at the exact inverse of healing and transformation. We're looking at affliction and transformation. So like Amelia, who was in her life afflicted with blindness, instead of going from blind to sight, she went from the opposite, from sight to blind. Yet, that was transformational for her in opening her up into what it looks like to follow Jesus. And so how are the things that we are not healed from? How are the afflictions continuing to open up opportunity for spiritual transformation in our lives? I want to start with a couple of scriptures. One of them is at the end of Jesus' farewell speech to his closest followers. We are right here at the beginning of Advent. This is looking forward to the celebration of Jesus coming. And of course, his life culminated in the crucifixion and then the resurrection. And will culminate again in the way that Jesus comes back. We look ahead to that in this time as well. So as I think of Jesus' final words to his followers right before his crucifixion, I can think of those as, in a way, final words to us now, while we're also waiting for this coming back. So right at the end of this beautiful speech he's given. Go ahead and read it for yourself. John chapter 14, 15, and 16. His final words to say, hey, I'm leaving, and this is what I want you to know. This is from the very, very end of that. It's starting in verse 31. John 16, 32. Look, a time is coming, and it's here, when each one of you will be scattered to your own homes, and you will leave me alone. But I'm not really alone, for the Father is with me. And I have said these things, all this farewell talk that I've given you, I have said these things to you, so that you will have peace in me. In the world, you will have distress. But be encouraged. I have conquered the world. You will have affliction. You will have distress. You will have things that are wrong now that won't be made right now. I have things in my life that are in those categories. But Jesus is telling us, take heart. Be encouraged. Be emboldened. Listen, I have overcome. I have conquered the world. And in a way that echoes this sentiment, the opening of the letter of James, chapter 1, verse 2, James says, look, my brothers and sisters, that's you and me, whenever you face trials of any kind, consider it nothing but joy, because you know that the testing of your faith produces endurance, and let endurance have its full effect, so that you may be mature and complete, lacking in nothing. I would love that to describe each and every one of us. I would love us to be a community of people who follow the way of Jesus Christ into a deepened maturity, into a way that we are complete and we're lacking in nothing. The word here that Bart has talked about before that means a lot to me as well, this word teleos. It's a mature and completing finishing work. that we are all on a journey towards. Advent is a tool that gets us one step further into that journey, even in the midst of affliction. So the question I want to ask you and to me is, how does affliction lead to transformation in our lives? How can your afflictions actually help you be transformed to learn to live and to love more like Jesus in your own life? We all know that affliction can lead away from Christ. It can lead towards bitterness, towards resistance, towards unforgiveness, towards a hardening. We've all seen this happen. I've seen it happen. But if we are people who are committing ourselves to say, in the midst of affliction, in the midst of this world where there are troubles, in the midst of this world where there is distress, both spiritually and physically, how can this affliction lead to a teleos-oriented, a beautiful, final-oriented, maturing, deepening, openness, compassion, and love? I want us to be the kind of people who are deepened in the Spirit. Here are a couple reflections on that. I picture us as always people in motion. I had a soccer coach who said, during practice, don't ever kick a soccer ball that's not moving, because very rarely in the midst of the game is the ball actually stopped. So in practice, he always had us kick a moving ball. And that's how, an analogy for how we are living our spiritual lives. We are always in motion. And in that sense, we're always turning one way or another as we're taking a step forward. So in the midst of affliction, it's taking that next step back towards God. And I picture it, here's a window inside to how I picture this adventure of spirituality. I picture Jesus at the center of it all. And in this Jesus-centered set, my turning is actually towards the center. And I can be, if this circle is right here in the middle where my hands are, I can be here or I could be further out here. The important thing is that my steps are actually towards the center. And as long as I know that I am walking towards Christ, I am aiming towards the center, that is towards the goal. So when you experience trials of any kind, when you have an affliction, you are not standing still. And your next step is either closer towards Christ and these descriptions of openness and love and forgiveness, or your next step is towards bitterness, hardening, unforgiveness, and it's a turn away from Christ. And it's not that first step that means that you're really far down the path, but it's that first step that sets your course. If your course is not walking towards Jesus in the midst of these trials of any kind, just make sure your next step is one that turns towards Jesus. So the first practical answer to that question is center on Jesus, who is the center of it all. And the next one, for those of us who are from Western cultural tradition, Western thought process that have been handled down to us, we often think of the body and the spirit with a division. We think of a divide, a psychosomatic divide. And even in our own scriptures, when we say we love God with all our mind, all our soul, and all our strength, again, there is a temptation to divide these things. But I would invite you, as a practical step towards transformation in the midst of affliction, is to connect the physical and the spiritual divide. So take one step closer towards saying, I am not a disembodied spirit from my body, but actually my spirit is located in the midst of this body. And even though this body has an affliction, even though this body can go from sightedness to blindness, that actually is connected to how my spirit can be opened up. So we are walking towards Christ as fully embodied spirit and body, fleshly humans that get to turn our spiritual journeys towards Christ that are connected to our physical journeys. So if we have turning towards the center, we have connecting the divide of this physical and the spiritual in our lives. The third one would be that an affliction could actually be a prayer trigger. I know trigger isn't quite the word I was looking for, but I couldn't find one that I liked better. In the midst of this grief group that we're working through, we know we're thinking of triggers in the sense of something that can send the train down the tracks without us even thinking about it. So I'm lacking the word I actually want there. But as you're praying, as you're experiencing the affliction, that can be a reminder, a quick reminder to connect to God through prayer. I've told some of you this before, that I have a constant ear ringing in my ears. It's something that I live with. It's something I've prayed for healing for. But as of this point, I have not yet experienced the healing. I'm experiencing the affliction. But on my better days, when I hear the ringing, I can use that as a trigger of a reminder to prayer. And for those of us who have participated in fasting of some kinds, that's an angle of fasting as well. When there's a hunger, use that actual physical hunger as a reminder to deepen the journey in prayer and take the next step in prayer. Another thing is a really basic spiritual question. This is a guiding spiritual question that I know you may have heard in other ways. But the question is this: God, what do you have for me in this? As we race past suffering in our culture that likes to avoid suffering, as individuals who don't like to be in pain, including myself, we're actually racing by keys that God can drop off for us. Keys that will open doors only in the midst of this affliction. So if we pause in the midst of it and have the presence of mind to just ask this question: God, what do you have for me in this? What key are you giving me access to right now that opens the door that I wouldn't have accessed if I had raced past this? And there will be gifts for you in the midst of experiencing the affliction. I don't know what they are, but God is one who promises God's presence in the midst of suffering. And there will be ways that you'll know God's provision more deeply, God's love more deeply for you. You'll know God's care and God's presence more fully because you stop to ask, God, what do you have for me in this? Another thing, as I would say, is continue to seek healing. It can be fatiguing. I was praying with a friend on the phone on the way here, praying for things that we've been praying for years. And there can be a spiritual fatigue in not seeing what I want to see answered in the way I want to see it answered already. But continuing on in that, persevering in the seeking of healing on the physical is like a lever that seeks our continued healing on the spiritual. As I was preparing for this talk, I thought it would be foolish of me to try and give this talk without talking to Marilyn. Many of you who are part of this church know Marilyn, and I was going to give a talk opening with a story on someone who moves from sightedness to blindness, and I thought, well, we have Marilyn in our own community of faith here, our own family here at Summerlin, who has suffered from macular degeneration. Her sight has deteriorated significantly over the years. She used to be able to see fully, and now she cannot. So I gave her a call, and I said, Marilyn, I want to hear from you. And that was one of the richest phone calls I have had in a long time. It was just like, my heart was prepared to hear it in a way, and it was just like God just said, David, I have so many gifts for you in the midst of this call. So on that call, I was making some notes, and so many things stuck out to me, but here are just a few. One of them was, I asked Marilyn, as you hear the scriptures read, specifically on the stories of Jesus' interactions with people who are blind, what do you hear? And she said quite simply, it's their faith that makes them whole. I race past that too many times. As you and I are still in the midst of affliction, we can continue to use that as a lever for continued spiritual healing. And we know that it's actually our faith that makes us whole. Again and again, as we read those stories throughout Jesus' lifetime, as he's healing, he says, your faith has healed you. It's your faith that's made you whole. I also asked Marilyn, a personal struggle that I have is receiving well. I love to walk into a room and give, and I have a really hard time walking into a room and receiving. It's a journey that I'm on. I'd say I'm a recovering receiver. I'm probably better at it now than I was a few years ago, but I'm still on a journey. So here's a woman who needs someone to lead her by the hand. Most of the time that's Bill. And Bill is a man who is in a beautiful situation to be so close to her. But I asked her, how do I grow in receiving well? And she just said so simply, well, you're accepting gifts from God. How do you see what God has given you? So if I'm hung up on rejecting gifts of generosity from other people, it's actually God's generosity that's flowing through them. So if we put ourselves in the place of receiving gifts as receiving gifts from God, it frames how we see what God has given us. And even in the midst of affliction, God is gifting you. So as you grow in interdependence or even dependence on others, how do you see what God has given you through those people? And another thing that we know to be true, but Marilyn highlighted is, she said, well, with the loss of my sight, other senses have become more prominent. And she said she listens more. And I said, well, what do you hear by listening more? And she said, so much of life is competition. Don't you love that? As someone who stopped trying to enter into the conversation again and again, as she listens, she hears that so much of life is competition. So in the midst of her affliction of blindedness, one of her transformations has been to be able to step out of the cycle of the competition in life. And I took that as a personal challenge, hopefully in a healthy way, a personal challenge to step back from the ways in which I just want to win. I just want to participate in that conversation or get the last word just because I have a competitive spirit. Finally, she said, in so many ways, life is like a puzzle. And there are individual pieces, and those pieces might be an afflicting piece or a painful piece. But she said at her age, once she's gotten to put it all together, she sees one large, beautiful picture. And she sees God's hand in the midst of each spot along the way, especially with her amount of reflection and wisdom over the years she's had to inventory and see all the pieces of the puzzle come together. She's gotten to see a very beautiful picture. We all know that Paul said that he suffered from a thorn in his side. And we don't know what the details of what that was, but it's something that I don't know that he was ever healed from. And as we think of Marilyn's lasting taste in the mouth of the pieces of the puzzle fit together into a beautiful picture, I want to end our time just by reading this scripture over you as you and I are people in the midst of affliction and transformation. I want to pray you into a deeper transformation, even in the midst of affliction. So this is from 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 7 through 12. And I'll read this as a prayer over each and every one of you. But we have this treasure in clay jars, so that it may be made clear that this extraordinary power belongs to God and does not come from us. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed, always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be made visible in our bodies. For while we live, we are always being given up to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus may be made visible in our mortal flesh. So death is at work in you, but life is in you. Amen.
O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel, that mourns in lonely exile here, until the Son of God appear. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. O come, thou root of Jesse, free thine own from Satan's tyranny. From depths of hell thy people save, and give them victory o'er the grave. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. O come, thou day spring, come and cheer our spirits by thine advent here. Disperse the gloomy clouds of night, and death's dark shadows put to flight. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. O come, desire of nations, bind all peoples in one heart and mind. Bid envy, strife, and discord cease. Fill the whole world with heaven's peace. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee,
We hope that today's message and song has been inspiring, uplifting, and has brought you a sense of comfort and joy as we begin this Advent season. We thank you for the donations that continue to come in to support our ministry. And we have a wonderful challenge ahead of us. Several donors have come together to present us with a $30,000 challenge gift. If we can match that $30,000, we will meet our $60,000 deficit by the end of this year. So please prayerfully consider a donation in any amount, and let's close that gap. You can mail it to us at the P.O. Box that you see on your screen, or do it via our website at summerlinchurch.org and just press the donate button. I hope that this coming week is filled with joy and comfort, and that you and yours and all you know continue to stay safe and be safe. Until next time, thanks for being with us.